Hello, everybody, and welcome to our storyteller training for today. My name is Laura Packard, and I'm a healthcare activist as well as founder of Healthcare Voices. About 5 years ago, I walked into a doctor's office with a nagging cough and walked out with a stage 4 cancer diagnosis. I'm in remission today, but all while I was going through treatments, I had to fight to keep my insurance because Congress was debating repealing the Affordable Care Act. So I would go from chemotherapy to protest to speech to talking to reporters. And all that happened for months. And I want to make sure that nobody else has to go through something like this and that everyone watching has the tools to share their story and advocate for themselves and for progressive policies. So I'm pleased to bring you this training, which is going to be the first in a series of trainings this year. So stay tuned for further trainings. And I am delighted to welcome Dr. Pamela Rutledge to tell us more about storytelling. Dr. Rutledge is an expert on the psychology of storytelling, the director of the Media Psychology Research Center, a core faculty member of Fielding Graduate University's Department of Media Psychology, as well as an advisory board member of the UC Irvine Extension Social Media Certificate Program and a featured blogger on Psychology Today. Dr. Rutledge is a media psychologist and social scientist who applies expertise in human behavior and neuroscience, along with 20 odd years as a media producer, to media and technology. Throughout her career, she's translated structures and data into the human stories that create actionable audience engagement strategies. In honor of her work, Dr. Rutledge was recently awarded the Distinguished Professional Contribution to the Field of Media Psychology Award by American Psychological Association's Division for Media Psychology and Technology. Welcome, Dr. Rutledge.
Thank you. What a great introduction. I feel humbled here. What I really care about is that you who are out there trying to make the world better, that you're trying to make people make a difference, that you're trying to persuade people, that you have the tools to do it. And the tool that you all need right now is the ability to tell a story. I'm sure you've all noticed, big digital landscape, we're streaming live across a bunch of things, which means that there is no shortage of information. And if you want to get people's attention, you have to use a story. And I'm going to tell you a few of the psychological reasons why stories are so powerful. But I want you to keep in mind that when you're telling a story, you're trying to change people's minds. You're trying to promote action. You're trying to get them to do something. So you're going to be approaching storytelling a little bit different than if you were Marvel Comics, right? Where you're bringing the whole thing in for a happy landing. There are four things I want to talk about with stories. One is that storytelling is the building block of the brain. We translate all this information that we get from the real world, sensory information, through chemicals into meaning. It's hard to believe that all of that stuff is coming in as chemicals, but it does. Don't pay any attention to the fine print. You can get a copy of these slides if you want it. But the point here is that there's a lot going on in the brain when you tell a story. 20% of the brain works when you use text. 60% of the brain is working when you use story. And what happens with story is that it activates the social element. Stories are fundamentally about connecting people. Because of our mirror neurons, when you tell a story, people mirror your experience. When you tell a story, people connect with you at a very visceral level. If you create a story with that story arc, you give them the oxytocin, the love hormone, and the dopamine, and all the rewards of taking that journey with you. So you've actually got them psychologically and chemically on your side when you're telling a story. The second thing to remember is the primacy of emotion. There's a great analogy that a psychologist, Jonathan Haidt, makes, which is that the emotion is the elephant and the rational brain is the rider. And so it's pretty easy to see that if the elephant wants to take a direction, that he's going to go. So the job of the storyteller is to connect with the elephant, is to inspire the elephant to follow in the direction that you want to go. Great quote by Maya Angelou. I'm sure you've all heard it. People will forget what you said, but they will never forget how you made them feel. This is essential when you're talking about advocacy work. Why are stories sticky? There's a lot of reasons cognitively why stories are so persuasive. One is that a story creates a picture in your brain. We process images 60,000 times faster than we do text, which means that if you tell a story that creates a good picture, someone is there with you. They start to feel it. They start to understand it in a very multisensory kind of way. Whereas if you're just giving them numbers or facts, they're not connecting with it emotionally. The other thing is that stories connect us through a very fundamental, universal experience. We all understand, for example, what a hero is. Now, your hero and my hero might be completely different, but we all have an image in our head of what that means. All of these kind of cognitions activated when you tell a story and make whatever you're telling so much more powerful. But the most important thing, and especially in advocacy work, is that you're really doing this to help people. And stories are fundamentally social, right? A story is something you tell someone. A story without telling someone is nothing. So what you're really trying to do is find a way to bridge your experience and your emotion to someone else so that they can feel it as well. When you do that, you create empathy and caring. And in fact, you lower people's resistance to new ideas, and they make them much more amenable to coming along and following in the kind of ideas that you're trying to share. So let me just break down so that you can start thinking about how you're going to want to tell your story. Now, the first thing is you need a good story, but you don't need just one story. Once you know what your main story is, you can tell that in a lot of different ways. What matters is that you tell what is fundamentally the same story in many different ways. So what's in the story? I'm talking about is the purpose and the morals and the values behind that main story. And then from there, that will dictate the structure that you use, how you create your characters, who is the hero, what is the catalyst, what was the conflict, where is the transformation, how is that story going to be challenged, and how is it going to end? Now, one thing to be thinking about when you're doing advocacy work is that you really want your audience to be able to step into the role of the hero. You are trying to empower them with what you care about, but you're also trying to empower them so that they feel capable of helping, so that they feel like they can take an action and make change. We inherited this from the ancient Greeks. We inherited a lot of things from them, but basically this is a good model to keep in your head about you want to start with what is, and then you have a challenge, what could be, and how are you going to get there? So you have to have that conflict. You have to have something that's keeping you from what will be, because otherwise there is no energy for your story. There's a great little book called Storytelling and Branding, and I love this little model of the conflict thermometer, because it helps you to visualize that you need a level of conflict. But what's great is that you need to match the conflict with the story that you're telling. So that they give the example here of using Greenpeace, and Greenpeace likes to keep the conflict very high because they're trying to argue against, the end of the world as we know it, right? Whereas if you're selling a different kind of idea, if you're trying to get people to change their lifestyle behavior, you're not trying to scare them to death, right? You're trying to make it urgent enough and empower them enough so that there's conflict, but it's something they can deal with, whether they have the ability to make those changes. So you think about conflict not just as an all or one thing, but something that is going to suit your audience and deliver your message. Now, here's where traditional storytelling, like in entertainment, differs from advocacy storytelling. A resolution of a story is very powerful. There's a lot of neurological rewards in having a story end. But if you're trying to change behavior, what you're trying to do is create a vision of the end and a path for your audience to take action to help you get there. So, I mean, think of all the ads, just a simple ad, like the Corona beer ad, where there's a beer bottle and you see someone sitting on the beach. There's a whole story behind that of how you need to get to that beach to relax. So what you're trying to do is empower people to see your vision and tell them how you need them to help to get you all there. Just let me give you a few examples of some different campaigns to empower change. Now, Tom's Shoes, this was back in 2006, so it's old story, and it's owned by, that got bought by an investment bank. And so it's not really the same Tom's anymore. But what he did was brilliant, is that he took, obviously selling shoes, but he took something that was a big issue, child poverty, and he brought it down to a very human size. So you bought a pair of shoes, he gave a pair of shoes away. So it was a manageable way of making a contribution to child poverty without this sort of larger, well, I don't know what to do, and it's all so big, I can't possibly help, or I wouldn't possibly make a difference, where you see everything was making a specific difference. Another campaign that was very successful, this was an anti-littering campaign. Don't Mess with Texas. And they had a number of celebrities, but Willie Nelson was by far the most successful, because what they were doing was activating identity to get people's behavior to change. So that he was telling them people are messing with Texas, right? And if you're a Texan, you don't want people messing with you. And this activated a whole change in behavior and a shift in attitude of thinking about littering as something that was violently against who they were as a Texan. So very powerful when you can use these kind of psychological levers to engage people's emotion and commitment. Another narrative that goes on is this challenging social norms. Now, Dove has been doing this for a long time, and they've had a very consistent message about real beauty. They want people to feel confident in their own beauty, and they've done this in any number of ways. And so this is what I was talking about how you can have lots of different stories, lots of different campaigns, but they all are fundamentally the same narrative, getting you to think about yourself as beautiful and whole as you are. Now, here's an example of a missed opportunity. This is the Surfrider Foundation. And so what they are trying to get people to do is not pollute the ocean. It's a great cause, a really important cause. And there is absolutely no emotional engagement here with this man in the white suit. And I get that he's a scientist, but why not tell a story about a surfer who's looking at the dirty water, or some way that it's visceral and relatable to people who are out there using the beach, not the people who are measuring the water. So this was a real missed opportunity where a story could have been incredibly powerful. Stories could have been all around the world, because obviously people surf all over the world. And instead they've got a scientist in a white suit, which is both sterile and distancing. So let's do some ideas about how you can go about finding your story, and then we can Laura and I can chat if she's got any questions. But start by building a story bank. Don't sit down and think you're going to find the perfect story. Start building a story bank of possible stories that you can work with. So once you focus your goal, what is it that we want to say? And then how do we paint a picture? And what are the different ways that we can paint a picture? Now, here's where knowing who you're talking to is really, really important, because you want your story to be emotional. Obviously, you want it to be memorable. You want it to be actionable, and you want it to be easy to share. This was a campaign in the UK, and they wanted to get young women to exercise. I'm going to clear my throat. Excuse me. They wanted women exercising. They were smart enough to spend some energy and resources researching the young women they wanted to exercise. And they found out it wasn't just that people were lazy or they didn't like exercising, it's that they were embarrassed about how they looked exercising. This completely shifted the campaign. There's a great video that they put out called This Girl Can. I suggest you Google it. This campaign is several years old now, but incredibly a great example of how knowing your audience influences how you tell the story. Because if you're telling the story for yourself, you already believe, right? You don't need your opinion. You need the next guy to take up the mantle. Where are you going to get these stories? All kinds of places. Don't limit yourself to this idea of the perfect story. Start making notes: successes, failures, mentors, popular culture, experiences that you've had. I mean, there's a lot of ways that you can use popular culture, especially, to use that as a metaphor to explain something complicated to someone by using something they already understand. To develop your story, brainstorm, mind map it, sticky notes, notebooks, journals, and then make sure that your values are driving fundamentally the story, that you're taking into consideration your audience and what role they're playing in the story. Too often we get passionate about something and we want to tell this story, but it's about us. It's not about the audience. It's the audience that you need to come with you. So you need to make room for them in your story so that they feel empowered and activated. To get started, pick one story and work on that. What's the conflict? What are you trying to do? Is it working? Practice tell it to each other in your team or to people on the street. But test the story and make sure that what you're developing has that emotional impact and that grit and that ability to paint a picture so that people come along with you, because that's really where you're trying to take this, is to change people's opinions. And then I would usually recommend, plotting it out. Make a, plot it out on with images and the text, the script, so that you can start to see how you're going to tell that story and start to see what the pictures that you're describing, how those are going to manifest in somebody's brain. So I'll just wrap up quickly. Identify your goal, focus on the audience and know who you're talking to. Make sure that you have all these structural elements, that you have some conflict, that you have characters that are relatable, that you're making room for the audience to step in, and that you know how to resonate with your audience and the kinds of things that they care about. You can rewrite your story, prepare for it to be taken by other people, but a successful story is one that gets shared and owned by other people. So the best stories are the ones that other people take on for you. And that's what I got.
Thank you. So, Dr. Rutledge, why are our stories so powerful?
Well, I think it really boils down to emotion. I mean, that you're trying to communicate emotion to another person. And the only way to do that is to give them a context of a lived experience. And so story allows someone to step into an experience. It isn't like saying 47% of all people, who, go to the doctor get misdiagnosed. It's, I got misdiagnosed. You could get misdiagnosed. It becomes a very palpable experience. So that's that sharing and connecting that you really want to activate.
And can you give an example of a truly powerful story, and what tools did the storyteller use to be so compelling?
Well, I think that, a couple of the examples that I showed, I think one of the ways that Tom Shoes was so successful is that he recognized, and that was 2006, that this is no longer a single medium environment. And so he told his story across all kinds of different, platforms, and obviously less platforms then than now, but he was, making YouTube videos. He was also launching offline real life, events where people could walk through boxes of sand and dirt and rocks to see what it felt like to be a kid with no shoes. So he created all of these different experiences. And when you're developing a story, even if you don't have the resources to be that expansive, as long as you're thinking about all those things, so if an opportunity arises, you're ready to take it. It's really understanding that story and how you can manifest it across all of these different avenues that you have to communicate with people.
And speaking of the digital world, how does the digital media landscape of today affect how we tell and experience other people's stories?
Well, obviously, it makes a big difference. I mean, the best example right now, of course, is the Ukraine invasion, and how all these TikTok videos have created a much larger narrative through all these little slices of life. And so even though these are all individual stories, they're all, especially they're the Ukrainian ones, which are the ones, of course, we're seeing in the West, are all fundamentally the same story. So it's really a case of understanding where the platforms are that of the people you want to reach. I mean, the really interesting thing about TikTok right now is, of course, that the demographics of it are quite young. So it's actually created a very active, politically active, younger population, which is not always the case, especially in the US. But recognizing what each platform does well and how your story can benefit from that platform and the way it tells stories can really amplify your message, and you can get a lot from a little.
Mm-hmm. Could you deconstruct a story and give us a kind of how-to? If you're somebody that has experienced something in the healthcare world, for example, if you are a patient, a survivor, and you're pushing for lower healthcare costs, for example, specific legislation. So how do you take your story and make it compelling and to persuade others?
Personal stories are the most powerful, but also probably the most difficult, because it's very hard when it's your personal story to figure out how to let the other person hear it. So that's one where I would think about, how am I framing this story? When I say frame, I mean, what are the sort of the constructs that I'm putting around this story to help people understand? Am I telling a story about we need to change legislation? Am I telling a story about we need to have more compassion for people in suffering from this disease? So to think about what it is very specifically that you want to focus on, and then lean into that when you're creating this narrative arc. But you have to start with something that is sort of acceptable, and then the conflict, and what's the goal, the resolution. And like I said, with advocacy, we're not there yet. We're not to the end. We haven't achieved, the ta-da at the end and the, off into the sunset. We have to explain what that is. We have to be very clear about what are these call to actions.
Okay, and can you give us one more recap of the key elements of storytelling before we move to our next speaker?
Sure. Emotion, 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 emotion. No, is to make sure that you're listening, that you know who your audience is, so that what you're trying to communicate, they can hear. And keep it simple, but pay attention to that story structure. Make sure that you have conflict, a clear goal, and a path to achieving it, so that you empower your audience.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rutledge, for your time.
My pleasure.
And now we're going to be talking about how to deploy a powerful storytelling in your personal story. It's my pleasure to introduce Brad Bauman. He is an expert on communications and PR, a partner at Fireside Campaigns, and the former executive director of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, where he oversaw its legislative, communications, and political operations for over 80 members of Congress. He's also been the communications director for various members of the House and congressional campaigns. Brad has dedicated his career to developing communications and PR strategy for electoral and issue campaigns at every level, and has handled some of the most difficult crisis communications problems throughout prior presidential administrations, and is a trusted voice among political operatives. He holds a BA in political science from Florida International University and an MA in political management from the George Washington University. Brad Bauman, welcome.
Laura, thank you so very much for having me. It is such a pleasure to join you and to join the audience here today.
So tell us more about you and your career around storytelling.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. So I think that it's fair to say that over the last 20 years that I've been working in politics, I have been captivated and ultimately decided to make a career around the transformative nature of storytelling. The truth is that I think everybody knows just from in their own personal experiences that they have listened to speeches, they have heard leaders who have given these incredible, passionate appeals to people's sensibilities, and have often wondered, like, wow, like that inspires me, that moves me, that changes me, it challenges me, it brings me to a place where I'm thinking about the world in a very different way. And I've always wanted to delve into what was at the root of that. What exactly was creating the mental space inside of an audience member that would lead to changing minds, ultimately leading to what I hope for is helping, the arc of justice really and true, the arc of history truly to bend towards justice through storytelling. And so, as a communicator and as a political operative, I have really placed an emphasis on talking with folks about how to effectively tell their own story and ultimately how to move past some of the mental barriers that your audience might face, in order to become more receptive to hearing you, considering what you have to say, and ultimately leaving the right emotional response in the back of people's minds.
Great. So, how do you make a compelling message?
It's a great question, Laura. The very first premise of making a compelling message is to think about your audience and to put yourself emotionally in their shoes. All message, no matter what you are trying to say, is ultimately about creating emotional connection. Long after anybody that listens to you forgets the words that you say, the thing that they will always remember is the way that you have made them feel. And so your message should be compelling. It needs to be emotionally connective, but not so much just emotionally connective in terms of getting people to emotionally connect with the story you're telling, but it needs to be emotionally connective in terms of your own understanding of the emotional state of your audience. What you really want to do is you want to ensure that as you're telling a story, your audience fully believes, fully understands that you understand how they feel, and that you're not telling them that they're wrong in feeling that way. And one of the things I always like to remind people, especially messengers in this time and space that we currently live in, is that think about everything that we've been through just over the last 4 years. Think of everything we've been through over the last 6. Heck, think of everything we've been through in the last 20. A lot of people, when they're thinking about things through a political lens, have come to a place where they are always thinking through the lens of crisis. And so the more base portions of the brain, what we always call the lizard brain, is really in charge and really guiding people's views on what's happening in the world. It means that people are making very, very spot decisions on the fight or flight response that is deeply embedded in the emotional state of that, most primal part of our brain. As storytellers, what we can do through our stories and through emotional connection is we can actually break them out of that crisis point. We can break them out of that initial response where they're looking at somebody like you and me and saying, not sure if I trust them. I don't think they think the way that I think. And so they can't possibly understand, and they can't possibly get like the things that I'm afraid of. And get them to a place where they're like, you know what? Maybe they do. Maybe they do understand what I'm going through. Maybe they do see what's happening. And maybe I should listen to them a little bit further. Because even if the things that they're saying to me in their story might be challenging my worldview or challenging the way that I kind of see, a particular issue, at least I know that they fully understand what I'm going through, what I feel. And that's really, truly the first step. Once you get to that point, it needs to be memorable. It needs to challenge them. It needs to get them to a place where you're leading them towards the policy solutions that you want the world to inhabit. And then finally, it should be as brief as possible, because remember, most situations, most storytelling, most public speaking, you really don't have a whole lot of time.
Yep, that is true. So, assuming you have your message and you have your compelling personal story, what other factors are important for you to consider?
Well, the first and most important thing to consider are media motivations. In most situations, as storytellers, you're going to be asked to participate in any number of venues that are constructed in a way that, kind of put you in the avatar position. You are an expert in your field. You're an expert as an activist. You're an expert as somebody who has had experience with the healthcare system in a way that, media is going to feel is compelling and helps to move a story forward. And because of that, what you should remember is that whether it be print or TV or radio, or if you're giving a speech, that ultimately you're being booked because somebody has decided that the motivation of the show is going to be moved forward by your participation. So let's talk a little bit about that. First, we obviously want to always be accurate and present useful and timely information that also are going to say things that the journalists can't say. And what do I mean by that? Well, in 9 out of 10 times that you're going to either be on a TV show or you're going to be talking with a print reporter, the truth is that the journalist is actually an avatar for the larger audience that is either reading them or listening to them or viewing you on TV. They're there to be objective. They're not necessarily there, unless you're on an opinion show, to voice their opinion. But by virtue of whom you're speaking to, let's take Rachel Maddow for a second. We can make inferences around Rachel Maddow's audience, how Rachel Maddow's audience is going to perceive the world. Or you might be talking to your local paper or local TV, and you might know or have some insight into what the audience there is thinking or feeling. But at the end of the day, even though a journalist is there to be objective, to write things as they see it in the moment, they're turning to you primarily because you're there. You can say something that forwards the story in a way that they themselves can't say. You can provide insight into, say, a progressive ideal of how the healthcare system should be working. Or you are there in order to be somebody who can explain why a particular set of policies that are being considered in the State House would be absolutely detrimental to hundreds, if not thousands, of families across various communities in your state. And you want to give them something that says, you want to give them something in your storytelling that says something that is going to be on the minds of what the audience is already thinking, as a way to bridge folks into your policy solutions, into leading them into your way of thinking. And then finally, remember that reporters, and please ignore the lovely, lovely tuxedo cat in my lap. Reporters or producers are looking for reliable sources of information. And remember, you are the expert. A lot of folks, before they go on TV or before they start talking to news media, have moments of self-doubt, have moments of imposter syndrome. Just remember, you wouldn't be asked to participate in a TV show. You wouldn't be asked to participate in a news story if you weren't an expert, if you weren't somebody who the media knew was credible and could talk about the subject in a way that would connect with the audience.
Now, tell me more about what drives media coverage. How can we be a part of it?
It's a really, really great question. So we're in a world, and we live in a world where there are fewer and fewer opportunities to interact with reporters. Newsrooms are obviously a lot smaller today than they've ever been. There have been major contractions in terms of local newspapers around the country. We've seen where, the pool of potential reporters, the pool of potential people who are serving up information locally has shrunk to a great extent over the last 20 years. Because of that, there's a premium. There's a premium on reporters' time. There's a premium on space in local TV, in print. So first, and arguably the most important, it's always timeliness. Reporters are primarily driven by what is happening right now. And so it is critical that in all of your storytelling, in all of your media outreach, in all of the work that you do in order to forward your agenda, that you always remember that timeliness is the most important thing. After timeliness, reporters are really looking for stories that show, or statements that show change, impact, conflict. Those three things are what drive a large portion of political storytelling, of what is happening in state capitals, of what is happening federally. So the more that you can acclimate what you want to say towards stories on change, on impact and conflict, the better you are going to do in terms of, attracting the attention of the reporters that you want to attract. After that, you're talking about prominence and proximity. So local angles are much more important than something that is maybe what you would consider useful. The idea being that the closer the story is to the communities that are covered by that outlet, the more likely the chances that you will be asked to weigh in on the story. And then after that, it's usually stuff on trends, on something that is surprising. And then way at the bottom, honestly, is utility and usefulness. That's a basic framework for the different things that are kind of going through, or the different general rubrics of stories that reporters or producers are generally looking for.
Can you talk us through some basic media logistics, how to prepare for an interview or an event or something like that?
Absolutely. I really do believe that the most important part of any successful effort in the media really comes down to how effective your preparations are. The first thing that I would always do is you want to get all the information possible on any sort of media opportunity that you have. You want to know all the logistics. How long is it going to be? Are you going to be on the TV show by yourself? Are you going to be there as a panel? Is it just going to be you, giving a quick stand-up interview? Do you need to talk with a reporter for a half an hour, or is the reporter just calling you right before a deadline to get a statement? So try to find out all the information possible, including all the different angles that the reporter is going to be covering in the story. Asking the reporter a lot of questions is totally okay. They don't have to answer you, but you can always ask the questions. I mean, feel free to ask the reporter, hey, what are you writing about? What are you most interested in? Why are you interested in this story to begin with? Who else have you spoken to? And usually it'll be, well, I've spoken to, a couple professors, this, that, or the other thing. But the idea being that you might have an opportunity to get a sense of what others might have been saying if you know who else they've spoken to on the record about things. The second thing is to consider what you want to say. Back to some of the lessons that you were talking about in the previous section in terms of putting your story together, you really want to take the elements of the story that you already have and to think about them through the lens of the audience that you're going to be speaking to. Is it going to be a local news hit? Are you going to be talking to people in your community? Is it going to be a national hit? And that national hit, what audience are you going to be talking to? And you're going to really want to get down and think about kind of what those audiences that you're going to be talking to, who they might be. And that's where you kind of go past what's in here and saying to yourself, what are the things that I want to say? And you start thinking about the things that your audience needs to hear. It's an important psychological distinction. We're always in a position where we have a ton of things that we want to say. I know I am. I know that, like, before I used to do TV a lot, or basically any time that I'm doing something publicly, I know that there are like a lot of things that I want to say, but honestly, there is always a gap between the things that I want to say and what I know the audience really needs to hear. And the level of discipline that you can show in ensuring that you are actually talking to the audience about what it is that they need to hear, it's going to make the difference in terms of you just kind of storytelling and you actually emotionally connecting with the audience in a way that's moving them in the direction of change. Once you really consider what your audience needs to hear, then you can really match up the stories that you want to tell. Sometimes the stories that you're going to want to tell are going to be about your personal impact. It's going to be about, what it means to have been put towards near financial ruin because of, obscene healthcare costs. Sometimes it might be stories around you not being able to get the care that you need because an insurance company has stood between you and the life-giving prescription drugs or operations that you might have needed. There are any number of stories in your own personal experience that can be used in order to connect with your audience, and really fine-tuning the stories that you should be telling according to what the audience needs to hear is like a critical piece of this. Next, and this is also a real big one, don't treat preparing for interviews like cramming for a test. What you want to do is you want to stop preparing about an hour before you go live, because that'll give you time to actually have the things that you know that you need to say set in and allow the portions of your brain that kind of govern, the random access, the RAM of your brain to really get you into a place where you can recall the pieces in a cogent way that you need to. And then the other piece that I would also say is give yourself about a half hour before the interview to really calm yourself down. like any other experience, going before a large audience, talking to, somebody famous on TV, even giving an interview to a reporter can be a real anxiety producing experience. And I don't think that anyone should ever feel as though that they're not right to kind of be a personality or out there telling their story because they feel that anxiety that comes along with it. I will tell you that even in my experience, for years having gone on CNN, MSNBC, even the dreaded Fox News, the first, I want to say 10 seconds right before the camera clicked on, I always thought the same thing. Oh my God, this is going to be the moment where I am going to completely lose control and I'm not going to know exactly what I need to say. It happens to everyone. It happens to everyone, even people who did this 3 times a day, for a year and a half at a time. Don't sweat it. Give yourself a half an hour and do the things that kind of bring you back to center. For some people, it's meditation. For some people, it's breath work. Whatever the thing is that kind of gets you back to your center, do that for the half hour before you actually go into the interview. And it will ensure that no matter what the reporter throws at you, no matter what questions you receive, no matter what happens, you'll be completely prepared to take it.
Thanks. Now, do you have any tips for when you don't have the time to prepare? Perhaps you're speaking at an event and a reporter corners you afterwards, or maybe a reporter calls you out of the blue to talk about an issue. So what do you do when you don't have time to prepare?
Yeah, that's a great question. So let's take the reporter calling you and, you just weren't prepared for it. The very first thing that you should always do is ask that person when is their deadline, and then tell them that you will call them back. You should never feel pressured that the minute a reporter calls you, that you have to give them something right then and there. And 9 times out of 10, it is the absolute worst thing that you could possibly do. So I would recommend that as a regular course, if you ever do just get that call from a reporter, usually it actually comes in as a number that you don't recognize more than anything, and you pick it up. Just, again, say, hey, great. Really glad you reached out. Tell me, when's your deadline? Great. Can I call you back in about an hour? I just need to check on 1 or 2 things, and then we can have a conversation about this. Number 2, there are always going to be times, though, when that you can't buy time and you're just going to have to go into it, right? When that occurs, remember that the formulation for your answer should always be about modulating strength and warmth. First, no matter what a reporter asks you, even in the heat of a moment, when a reporter asks you a tough question and puts a mic in your face, remember that the first thing you need to do is to stop, take a breath, and think about how emotionally you're going to connect with your audience. Let's say a reporter just runs up to you, just for instance, and says, isn't it true that the things you're advocating for would absolutely bankrupt the healthcare system? You stop, you take a deep breath, and you say, I know that a lot of people are very afraid that by reforming our healthcare system, it might mean that they would have a lower quality of healthcare. But I know, based on my own personal experience, that the level of healthcare quality that we have in this country isn't even close to as good as it could be. And with the necessary things that we're trying to do, the things that we're advocating for here today, I am positive that every American, every person everyone here would receive a greater level of care than they do today. It doesn't matter if somebody is trying to hijack you in the moment. The thing that matters is your ability to stay cool, to stay centered, and to emotionally connect with the audience, no matter what the question is, and in a way that gets them to think a little bit differently, so that maybe they'll say, yeah, you know what, that's true.
Can you talk a little bit more about strength and warmth and how those are interview best practices to give a good interview?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you think about, and when we talk about strength and warmth, we kind of look at it almost as like an XY axis, a graph, if you will, about how one gives an effective interview. On the one hand, what you want to do is projections of warmth that ultimately allow folks to understand that, again, you emotionally understand where your audience is. And there have been a lot of speakers who have been very, very warm, but at the same time lack a piece that kind of binds things together for the audience in order to ensure that they believe that they can still, that they're a trusted figure. And so strength ends up getting exuded in interviews through your command of the material. So what I always like to do is I like to have one or two facts. And this is the only time. Notice you've been sitting through this training for like an hour, and this might be the first time anyone's hearing anything about using facts. It's because facts are only there for one thing and one thing only. After you prove that emotionally you understand, and after you prove to an audience that you emotionally understand what they're going through your storytelling, then you have to lead them towards your solutions, and you lead them to their solutions by showing them that you have a specific technical expertise, that you're going to tell them something that likely they're not going to remember, but that allows you to show them that, no, actually, you've done your studying. And so that gets you from warmth to strength. And when you manage those two things in tandem, and when you get really good at this and you're able to do the warm piece and then immediately transition into the strength piece, you are 2/3 the way towards creating very effective change messaging.
Great. So as something else that the audience might be interested in is this ties in very well with a book I just read called Cues, Cues by Vanessa Van Edwards. And she talks all about strength versus warmth and how you can dial up both to be a more charismatic speaker. So can you give us a summary, a recap of how to deploy a compelling story and do a successful interview?
Absolutely. And there's a great rule of 3 here for folks to know. What I would do is think about every single messaging opportunity, whether it be giving a statement or doing a quick 10-second answer on TV or answering questions with like in a format like this, that basically every answer you give should have 3 parts to it: a connection piece, a leading piece, and a distinguishing piece. Sometimes you connect and then you distinguish and lead. Other times you connect, you lead, and distinguish. And what do I mean by that? Well, if you are talking, if you're giving your storytelling, and you're giving your storytelling in a way that is, expressly talking about the inequities of healthcare, What you want to do is, after telling your story, after your connection, after getting to a point where you're explaining, where your audience truly believes that you understand what they're going through and what their emotional state is, you then want to actually use your storytelling to define who the bad guy is. That there are people out there who might be standing in the way of better health care or other things, for any number of reasons. It's an essential part of storytelling that after you connect, you kind of do, because every story, if you think about every story throughout history, it has a protagonist, an antagonist, and then something to learn from it. So by defining those three things, you're more able to ultimately be successful at giving a speech or answering a story for a reporter. Bottom lining it, if you connect, you distinguish, and then you lead your audience along to the solutions that you're seeking, ultimately you're always going to be an effective communicator.
And that's our goal. Thank you so much for providing all of these great words of wisdom. And for the audience, be sure to go to healthcarevoices.org/learn to watch this training and see past trainings. And also we'll have a media training checklist available for download, as well as the slides from Dr. Rutledge. So be sure to go to healthcarevoices.org/learn for all those additional materials. Thank you again for watching and for being willing to share your story, because your personal story makes the difference. And be sure to tune in to our future trainings too. So be sure to like the Healthcare Voices Facebook page, Twitter account, all the social media to get updated on our next training, which will likely be in a couple months. Thank you for watching.